Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvasadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good. And may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
Our song this morning is a song to Buddha, and it's on page 27 of the books underneath the seats in front of you. Rejoice, rejoice, now let us sing, for he was born this day. Through truth the Buddha has found the way, nirvana his gift to all. Rejoice, rejoice, now let us sing, for he was born this day. Through truth the Buddha has found the way, nirvana his gift to all. In birth and growth, death and decay, the endless wheel turned on. He broke that wheel for us that day. He saw a noble truth. He turned away from a king's reward to look at life in full. His eyes only saw our grief, his heart our tale of woe. Rejoice, rejoice, now let us sing, for he was born this day. Through truth the Buddha has found the way, nirvana his gift to all. He felt apart the burden great, the weight of life and death. He turned and spoke to such as we, our hearts became his own. Our cries were plain, yet no one heard, their hearts all turned to stone. He heard our moans, he knew our pain, compassion ruled his heart. Rejoice, rejoice, now let us sing, for he was born this day. Through truth the Buddha has found the way, nirvana his gift to all. We dreamed and dreamed this empty play, delusion filled our minds, but he awoke and broke the dream, the Lord of truth and light. We saw until he came to us, but shadows, mists, and murk. He brought a lamp into our lives, a light to show our way. Rejoice, rejoice, now let us sing, for he was born this day. Through truth the Buddha has found the way, nirvana his gift to all. We searched for peace, long unto strife, desire held us too close. He came and freed our hearts of fear, the rule of flesh undone. We knew not who nor whence we came, or why we drifted
truth, the Buddha has found the way. Nirvana, his gift to all.
Om Satoma Satkamayam Tamasoma Jyotirgamayam Mrityorma Amritam Gamayam Aviravir Mahedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our topic today is three jewels of Buddhism. According to the lunar calendar, yesterday was Buddha's birthday, so the full moon night he was born in. And so today, to remember his great life and teachings, and specifically these three jewels, we'll reflect in the next few minutes. But before we go to the jewels themselves, I want to say a little bit about the number 3. Somehow, number 3, and those of you who are numerologists may have a lot more to say on this, but in the field of religion, number 3 seems to have played quite a significant part. Of course, in Christianity there is the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. Among the Hindus, they have the three Murtis, the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Then many of you are already familiar. Presently we are studying in the Gita the three gunas, the Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Then of course Sat, Chit, Ananda, again 3. And the foundational texts of Vedanta called Prasthanatraya, they are also considered to be 3. The Gita, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras. In Taoism, there are the 3 treasures, the basic virtues they have. There are the 3 divisions of the written Torah in Judaism. And since for many, especially in Boston, for many Red Sox fans, so baseball itself is a kind of religion. So we see that there is the number of strikes before the batter is out is 3, and the number of outs per side per innings are also 3. And of course, the 3 jewels of Buddhism. In Buddhism as well, today is also called, as you know, the thrice blessed day. It is said that it's on the same day of the same year, the full moon night, that Buddha was not only was born on this day, but he attained that enlightenment, what's called bodhi, that supreme wisdom on this day, and he passed away was also on this day. So it's sometimes called the thrice blessed day. The foundational texts of Buddhism are also considered to be 3, called Tripitakas, the 3 baskets. So the Buddhist canon. So there's a lot that this number 3 is doing. So these 3 jewels or 3 gems, in the Sanskrit word or in the Pali texts, the word that is used is tri ratna. So Ratna, you can translate it as jewel or gems. So they are essentially three sharanas, three forms of taking refuge. These are central to the Buddhist monastic and lay ceremonies. While the formal ordination of either lay members or monastic members in the Buddhist tradition, they have to undergo a ceremony in which these three jewels play an important role. And many of you may be familiar. It's put simply, it just goes Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami, and Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. The Sanskrit and the Pali versions are almost same. The only major departure is, while Sanskrit the word is dharma, in Pali it becomes dhamma. So the R is missing. That's the only difference. And many of you may have heard the tapes or heard of it in Buddhist texts. It's a wonderful chant. When you hear this being chanted, it's very uplifting. Now, sharanam, taking sharana means taking refuge. Now we know that taking refuge means finding a place where we feel protected, where we feel safe. And so the Buddha taught that these are the three major sources in which every seeker of truth can find shelter, can find refuge. And we seek for refuge only when we sense danger, when we sense that we are not safe somewhere, and then we look for a place where we feel safe. And therefore, surrendering ourselves to a safe place is not necessarily always an act of blind faith. It's like this. There has to be some amount of trust involved. It's like if there is a storm coming and you take refuge in a storm shelter. You have a basic trust that that shelter will protect you from the storm. And so in spiritual life also, when we become spiritually sensitive in life, when we are able to look deeper into life, the reality is this, that for most people, most everywhere, the immediate and daily concerns and problems are so vital, or so they take so much of our time and energy that many times we neither have the interest nor the privilege to look deeper under the surface and see what the cause of the basic problem is. Our day-to-day problems can overwhelm us to such an extent that we may not have the capacity or even the interest to look and see, is there any basic problem that is causing all these other problems? And when we do that, and that's what spiritual sensitivity really means. What does it mean when a person becomes spiritually sensitive? That we are able to either step back or look more deeply into our present experience of life and try to see whether there is something else going on which may not be very apparent on the surface. And when we do that, then we discover that the problem is much more serious. It's like, but think about it this way. Now, economy, for instance. Now, most of us are not economists. We don't understand the larger forces operating, or why the value, the currency value, and all of this. Why does it go up and down? Why do prices fall? Why do prices rise? Many of us are affected by it, clearly, but we don't know the larger forces that work underneath it. So similarly, we are affected by the ups and downs in our daily life, not just in the terms of economy, but in every other way, in terms of stress, anxiety, worry, tension, relationships. But only the specialists can then look below the surface and see whether there is anything more subtle that is going on. And when we discover that problem, it's not a very pretty picture. And therefore, the first experience for a spiritual sensitive person can be very depressing in some ways. Not in a kind of neurotic way, but it's, as I said, it's not a very pleasant picture. And so some kind of a disappointment, some kind of unhappiness with the state of things is necessary in order for us to then try to seek for a way out. Because if we discover that everything is just dandy, everything is just fine, then there is no need to seek refuge anywhere. Well, everything is fine. Why do we need anything at all? But only when we discover that everything is not fine, that things are not right, it's only then that we would look to see in what way I can correct it. So the first experience of spiritual sensitivity is to discover the problem, perhaps discover also that the problem is not as minor as we originally thought, that it's not just some extra winds blowing, that it's a major storm. It's then that we look for a refuge. And that's why, in order for the spirit of surrender to animate our soul, there has to be some sense of helplessness, some sense of vulnerability. Only then are we able to go and look for a shelter, go and look for a refuge. And these are the three major sources where Buddha directs our attention: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I like the definitions of these three. You read any of the Buddhist texts, you will find wonderful ways. There's a lot written on this subject. There is this Vietnamese monk, many of you may have heard his name, Thich Nhat Hanh. I like the way he defines it in very simple language. So I'm just quoting him. So this is how he defines the Buddha. Buddha is the teacher showing the way, the perfectly awakened one, beautifully seated, peaceful and smiling, the living source of understanding and compassion. That's one beauty of the Buddha's image. You can see all of these terms, and no matter where you see that image, whether it is in a temple or on top of your television set or on your shelf, wherever it may be, wherever the Buddha may be sitting, the Buddha instills that sense of peace, that awareness within us. So he is that teacher who shows the way. Now what is Dharma? He said, Dharma is the clear path leading us out of ignorance, bringing us back to an awakened life. And Sangha is the beautiful community that practices joy, realizing liberation, bringing peace and happiness to life. And therefore these three refuges, when translated into English, would be: I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness. So I take refuge in the Buddha. Buddha was the first person to make it clear that Buddha was not a person. In fact, in one of his discourses, he says precisely in these words. He says, Buddha is a state, and all of you can enter into it. That's why in some Buddhist traditions, when they say Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, I take refuge in the Buddha, they also add this phrase, in me. I take refuge in the Buddha within me. I take refuge in the Dharma within me. I take refuge in the Sangha within me. To signify, to make it clear that all of these things are not simply external, they are primarily internal. That every one of us is a potential Buddha. Swami Vivekananda defined or put in a nutshell the essentials of Vedantic practice by saying every soul is potentially divine. And that's exactly what the Buddha taught, that every one of us is a potential Buddha. Buddha simply means one who is awake. We read in the second chapter of the Gita that about sleep, about sleeping and remaining awake. And we see that Krishna says that when everyone sleeps, the person, the self-controlled one, the enlightened one remains awake. And when the enlightened one is asleep, everyone else is awake. Now, he's not just speaking about clearly the sleep and idea of sleep and waking up that we understand. What it means is this: when we are asleep, the world is shut out from us. So sleep is a state when things disappear from our view. And awaking, remaining awake, is a state when we are aware of what's going on. And so what is meant in that verse of the Gita is that a person who's in touch with that spiritual reality is awake to the spirit. But when a person sees the spirit, the world, the material world vanishes. You cannot see both at the same time. Similarly, a person who just is in touch with material, perishable realities, that person cannot be in touch with that imperishable. Clearly, light and darkness cannot go together. In the same way, Buddha, there is that a kind of a story that's often told about Buddha. We don't know whether it's historical, but it drives home the point very well, that after enlightenment, the Buddha was sitting under a tree, and in complete calmness, just the way you see him here, and several people passed by as the day rose. It was just the next day after the full moon night, and people saw this person sitting very calmly, peacefully, and then someone goes and says, who are you? Are you a yogi? And Buddha just shook his head and said, no. And then some other person said, are you a saint? He says, no. And so on. The story goes on to say they kept on asking. And then finally they said, but then who are you? And then Buddha said, I'm awake. And that's what the word Buddha means. Now, Buddha was not the name that his parents gave him. As you know, his name was Siddhartha. So, but Buddha means the one who is awake, awakened to the reality. And therefore, when we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, it's not simply the historical Buddha. Of course, he becomes the embodiment, the symbol, the one who showed that it is possible. But it also means that potentiality within our own heart. Dharma. Dharma is the teaching, the path, the practice. And Sangha is a community. Now, for many of us, when our spiritual life begins, we can take a look at our own lives and say, well, who is the Buddha in my life? Who is the Dharma in life? What is my Sangha? Now, oftentimes, in the beginning of our spiritual life, our Buddha may well be some book that has inspired us. That book might be our Buddha. And maybe one or two sayings or teachings from that book which may have touched our heart, which may have resonated with our head and heart, that might be our own Dharma. And then maybe perhaps one or two visits that we have made to a place of worship or a temple or a church, that becomes our Sangha. So in the beginning, that may be, and as we evolve, as our understanding deepens, as our practice becomes deep, then we become more clear. Who the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in our lives are becomes more clear. Gradually, we begin to see then that what our spiritual ideal is. Who is the ideal? That ideal could be anthropomorphic or non-anthropomorphic. It could be an ideal, a concept, or it might well become real in our lives through some personality, historical or mythical. But that ideal, that Buddha in our life then becomes very real. Oftentimes, it can take the form of one's own guru. It can take the form of, in Vedantic terms, it can take the form of Brahman, the infinite reality. Or it can take the form of our Ishta, our chosen deity. Then that our chosen deity or Ishta becomes our Buddha. The spiritual practice that evolves in our life, or the practice that we receive when we receive formal instructions from a teacher, then that spiritual practice of ours becomes our dharma. And then that community of which we become a part. What is a sangha? A sangha is when people who share some common ideals, who are animated with the same quest for truth that we have, they come together and are able to work and support one another, then that becomes a sangha. It's not necessary. In fact, it would be terrible if everyone in the sangha thought in the same way. So sangha is not a way like everyone does everything identically. So where they are one is that they share that same desire to know the truth. They share the same desire to do away with all hypocrisy, to do away with all weaknesses. So there is this commonality as regards the ideal, but and the desire to help and support one another. So all of these three, as we can see, therefore, have two dimensions. There is the historical dimension and there is the timeless dimension. So historical dimension, Buddha is of course Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. The timeless dimension of that would be that same spiritual ideal that gets manifest at different times, in different cultures, in different traditions, in different ways. So all of these great prophets, incarnations, all of them are awake to that divine reality. Jesus, Ramakrishna, Shankara, all of these, whoever, in whichever form, Muhammad, all of these then are Buddhas. So they perform the role a Buddha would do to a Buddhist. All of these then become the Buddha, the awakened one. Similarly, Dharma becomes the spiritual practice. Again, it's not referring to any specific practice. Dharma doesn't simply mean a Buddhist practice. It simply means whichever practice would help me realize the truth, whichever practice would help me transcend my present limitations, whichever practice would free me from all the bondage. Now, in order for me to want to be free from bondage, I must be aware of the bondage. And that's what I said in the beginning. Spiritual sensitivity would mean that I become aware that we are not really free. Because only if I become aware that I'm not free, would I want to be free. Well, if I'm already free, then there is no such thing as wanting to be free. So freedom as a goal of life would make sense to me only when I become aware of my present bondage. Knowledge as a goal of life would make sense to me only if I become aware of my present ignorance. Perfection as a goal of life would make sense to me if I become aware of my present imperfection. So we cannot, and we need not, and we should not fix a goal, because I think the goal would vary from one person to another, depending on, and as we can see, what is it that we seek in life? We only seek in life what we lack. So only we have to see inside, what is it that I lack? What is it that I want? Is there anything I want in life? And whatever it is that I want, then that becomes my goal. So if I'm aware of my ignorance, knowledge becomes my goal. If I'm aware of my present state of bondage, then freedom becomes my goal. And only then it would make sense for me or someone else to say, moksha, freedom is your goal. It would make no sense at all if a person doesn't feel a sense of bondage within. Now all these three, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, they are not three, well they are three, but they are also very interrelated. In other words, when I take refuge in one, I automatically strengthen the other two. I automatically take refuge in the other two. You cannot, they are distinct, but they are not separable. In other words, for instance, if I take refuge in my spiritual ideal, if I take refuge in God, if I'm able to surrender myself to God, get the ego out of the way, that real self of one of the difficulties in surrendering. Theoretically, we all understand what surrender means, but practically, surrender becomes difficult for two things. One is the sense of I, and second is the lack of trust. It's like this. When you are, say, standing on top of a, say, maybe 10-foot high wall or a 15-foot high wall on top of it, and there is no way to get down. Maybe you don't know how to get down. And there is this person below who says, jump, I'll catch you. Now, will you jump or not? Now, when you just jump below, you are really surrendering. There is nothing you can do afterwards. The only way you will agree to jump is, first of all, you trust that the person below will really hold you. And the second thing is, if you're so much worried about this I, oh my God, what will happen to me? What if I fall down? What if I get hurt? If that I is too strong, then you will hesitate to do anything. And the same thing with regard to surrendering to God as well. First of all, there has to be that trust. And that trust comes from the word that is sometimes in English, we simply use the word faith. But it's, and the word faith gets used so often, so everywhere, that somehow it lacks the force of the word that is sometimes used in Sanskrit. So the word that is used in Sanskrit is Shraddha. Now, Shraddha is more than simply faith, is more than simply trust. Shraddha really means it's knowledge, but knowledge that does not come from the intellect. It's kind of the best way probably would be to say it's a gut feeling. It's like, you know, I can trust this person. You haven't reasoned it out. You haven't like analyzed it, but somewhere deep down you know, yes, this is okay. So that is what Shraddha means. So when a devotee has faith in God, the word is really Shraddha. It's like if you ask that, how can you have faith in God? Have you seen God? Can you have any proof that God exists? And perhaps the person has not seen God, has no proof, has no evidence, can't explain, but deep down, I know it's there. Now that is what Shraddha means. So we need that Shraddha. And then a little bit of a loosening of the ego. If I'm too obsessed with I, then again it's very difficult to let go. Now, when we become enlightened, the I, this little I will go, then this big I will come. But at least a little bit of loosening of the I is necessary in order for that surrender to happen. So when that happens, when I'm able to surrender myself with that Shraddha to God or the spiritual ideal, it is then that our practice becomes strengthened. It's like this. When we try to pray or when we try to meditate, why is it that we often feel that my mind is getting distracted, that I'm not able to concentrate? The reason is clearly there are things competing for my mind's attention. So a part of me who's just sitting down now trying to meditate on God, a part of my mind wants to think about God. But the other parts of my mind want to think about something else. Now, surrender would mean that I fully acknowledge that at this particular time, for the next few minutes, the most important thing to me is my spiritual ideal, my Ishta, my God. If I truly believe that that's the most important thing to me, then my mind shouldn't really go here and there. But that's not what happens, because the mind still thinks there are other important things. And therefore, sometimes the other things which are there seem more important than God. And therefore, of course, we sit, we do everything externally that is needed for meditation, but meditation really does not happen. So surrender would mean that when I sit, when I'm able to practice that kind of surrender, then even if it is for the 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I'm able to give myself fully to my spiritual ideal. Now, when that happens, it is then that your dharma, your spiritual practice gets strengthened. And the more the people we have in any spiritual community who try to practice that kind of surrender, who try to do their spiritual practice with that intensity, with that faith, with that devotion, then that community becomes strong as well. So you see how one's own spirit of surrender. So when I try to surrender to God, I'm not only benefiting myself, I'm strengthening my practice, and I'm benefiting the community of which I'm a part. Similarly, if I take refuge in the practice itself, if I say that this is the practice that I'm going to give my whole heart and soul to, clearly, no one can do it, no one need to do it all 24 hours a day. Even if you do it a few minutes a day, can I say for the next few minutes, I'm going to make an effort not to think of anything else. One of the very practical teachings that Swami Vivekananda gave was that if you want to truly develop a harmonious life, if you truly want to have a harmonious development of all the different faculties of the mind, would be that whatever it is that you're doing, at that moment, you should think that your entire salvation, your liberation, or whichever way, or your nirvana, depends on that thing. So when you're praying, say, I'm going to do this as perfectly as I can because this is what will make me free. Or when you're meditating, when you're doing some service somewhere, you're doing your work, you're taking care of your children, you're cooking, you are shopping, whatever it is that you do, at that moment, let that be the most important thing in your life. If I can do that, I would truly be able to experience that inner harmony. What happens in our lives mostly is this, that we already categorize things in our life, this is important, this is not important. And therefore, that which is not important, while I'm doing things that are not important, I can think about the important things. And what happens, so when my mind gets used to doing one thing while thinking of something else, it's after all the same mind. So when I'm doing an important thing, my mind has already gotten used to thinking of something else. So when I'm doing important thing, the mind starts thinking of something else, more or less important. And therefore we end up not doing anything with concentration. And so one of the important things that we learn from Buddha's teachings is that to just get rid of this distinction between less important and more important. There is nothing which is less or more important. If you think anything is less important, then it's probably not important at all. You probably shouldn't be doing it. Everything should be considered as an equal power. If it's a part of your life, it deserves your full attention, your full care, your full love. So if we can develop this kind of an approach, then we will see that taking refuge in our practice, it brings about a real inner transformation. And when that happens, it reveals to us the higher dimensions of our own ideal. Even the goal, the spiritual ideal that we may have one idea about it. For instance, those who think about Ramakrishna, for instance. So there is one way we understand Sri Ramakrishna. But as our practice deepens, we'll be able to see a deeper dimension to him. We will see, oh, this is how I used to think about him up to this point, but now I see something more, something deeper. And the more our spiritual practice becomes strengthened, we realize the value of the community of which we are a part. Again, as I said, all the three are interrelated. Similarly, if I now focus primarily, taking refuge in one's community means actively being a part of the community. Being an active part of the community means that I'm always present to serve the needs of the community. Why should I serve the needs of the community? Because I'm a part of the community. When I serve the community serves me. There is a saying in Mahabharata which says that dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. That means dharma protects one who protects dharma. A community is like that. Those who support the community supports them. And this happens and it's not just about the spiritual community, it's about anywhere. I mean, one of the first communities that we become a part of is our own family. So we see that we all receive the much needed support at every level from our family. Now we then take good care of the family and the family takes good care of us. You serve your country, and that's what patriotism is. You serve your country well, you try to serve the needs of your country, and then you will see then the country takes care of you. This kind of a mutual support that occurs at whichever level you understand the role of community in life. And then serving the community, we find it becomes so much more easy to remain true to the path. That oftentimes there are challenges for spiritual seekers. It's easy to get distracted. It's easy to have a detour, unconsciously oftentimes. So often people have found that those who are loners, so to speak, those who just try to say, I don't want anybody, I'm just going to do it on my own, which is fine. If you can, that's great. But oftentimes we see that if those moments when we need help, the moments when we feel weak, if we are on our own, there is really no support we can fall back on. But oftentimes we see when you're part of a larger group, it's then the group that can support us during those moments when we truly need support. So a community will help us remain on the true path, a path of our spiritual practice, especially when practice becomes dry. And all spiritual seekers have realized it. Even those who practice prayer, meditation regularly will find that there will be what sometimes gets called as dry periods, when the same practice of prayer, meditation, which brought so much joy, suddenly would say, oh, today I just don't feel like meditating. I'm not able to concentrate. I just don't feel like doing it. It's at such times we find then that our community then becomes a support. A community then helps us deal with that kind of a dry phase of our spiritual practice in a more mature way. So all of these three are interrelated. And so this is one of the great gifts that Buddha gave to his students then, 2,500 years ago, and benefits of which we are able to get even today. This very tremendous insight that in order for us to strengthen and remain true to our spiritual path, we need all of these three. Taking refuge in the spiritual ideal, taking refuge in our spiritual practice, and taking refuge in the Sangha, the spiritual community. In the Ramakrishna tradition, we sometimes identify these three, that Ramakrishna, for those who are students of Ramakrishna's life, Ramakrishna becomes the Buddha, the one awake, the one who has reconfirmed or revalidated the truth for many people of the times in which we live. And the insights, the revelation, the reconfirmation of these ancient truths that we saw in his life was then what would be the word? What gave a voice to those realizations of Ramakrishna, if you like, by Swami Vivekananda. Because Ramakrishna did not write any books, he didn't give any lectures. So it is these insights, once Vivekananda said, if there's anything good that I have said, anything that has helped anyone, it's not mine. It was the words of Ramakrishna himself. And if there's anything that I have said which is not good, then only that is mine. So the words that we find in Ramakrishna, so the students of Vivekananda's life, they see that among the many interpreters of Ramakrishna's life, Swami Vivekananda was probably the most prolific and the most important. And so the dharma that we see, Vivekananda stands in this tradition, who represent the dharma, who made these insights intelligible, who showed us the way, showed us exactly how and what we need to do. And it's the 4 books on yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, are a standing testimony to how these insights, the truths that Ramakrishna shared with all, he gave them a more concrete form. And Sangha, the community, is the Holy Mother. Oftentimes in the tradition of the Ramakrishna order, Holy Mother is called the Sangha Janani, the mother of the Sangha. Some of you who have read her life are aware that after Ramakrishna's passing, when this first group of disciples, most of them were young men who had chosen to lead monastic lives, so they had left the refuge of their families, if you like. But they were just wandering here and there. And then, and in India, of course, it's not that difficult if you are a monk to be able to find something to eat. There's always if there's a holy person, a mendicant, a hermit at the stage, there will be people to give alms to them. But even then, many of these first generation of monks of Ramakrishna, the disciples of Ramakrishna, they spent days and months walking, sleeping under trees, living through bhiksha, whatever people gave. And it was then that we read in Sharda Devi's life that she prayed intensely to Ramakrishna. She said that she prayed to him and said, well, when you were here, this such wonderful thing happened. A kind of community had formed. And now after your passing, all of these young men, they are kind of spread everywhere, become wandering monks. But what will happen to the generations? We need, please, she prayed ardently that may there be some form, some arrangement, some kind of a place where all of these people can come together and practice together and pray together. And that was really the way the Ramakrishna tradition, so to the Ramakrishna movement, the genesis of the Ramakrishna movement occurred as a result of that prayer that Holy Mother did. And we see what began as a very small, tiny little monastery in Calcutta, in eastern part of India, now has spread all over the world. Not necessarily only through these centers, not necessarily only through Vedanta societies, but even through literature, through word of mouth, the insights, the teachings have spread everywhere. Now, it's possible and that all of us, to whichever tradition we may belong, to whichever spiritual communities we may be a part of, to then look inside and say, as a spiritual seeker, as a seeker of truth, there is some Buddha in my life. There is some Dharma I'm a part of. There is some Sangha which supports me. And we have all to discover what that Dharma, what that Buddha, and what that Sangha is. At the personal level, the Buddha in me is the Atman. My prayer, my just living with awareness, that becomes my Dharma. And then every part of my body, every function of my mind is my own little community. And we know if all these members of my community, my hands, shoulders, and all the systems within, if they are in harmony, then everything goes well. If they are not in harmony, then we need to visit the doctors. So this is my personal community, the personal Sangha. So similarly, our family is the next Sangha we are a part of. Again, finding that harmony within that Sangha of the family, it becomes so much more easy then to do one's daily practice. And then there is the larger Sangha, whichever place of worship you go to. Vedanta Society is one such Sangha. So this then becomes a community. And as I said, at much larger levels, not necessarily in a spiritual sense, but often on the social planes, the nation, the country becomes one big Sangha. And in a much larger way, the entire planet on which we live is one big Sangha. So it's up to us to not just think of Sangha in just some specific rigid way, but to recognize that there are layers of Sanghas everywhere. And it's possible for us to be members of all of these Sanghas and contribute to all of these Sanghas in a very tangible way. So we are able to contribute to it and we are able to benefit from it. So these are the three jewels. There's a lot that we can reflect on it. I'm sure we just touched a few points from it, but the more I would encourage you to think about these three jewels. Think about the Buddha in your own life. Think about what your Dharma is. Think about what Sangha it is. See how it has nourished you, how it has transformed you. See what you can do to strengthen all of these, because these are the things that keep us together. So on this great day of Buddha's birth, my prayers that through his infinite grace, May that spirit of awakening fill our hearts so that we may all find the truth in this life itself. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, we'll have, as usual, Antar Yoga. With the prayer, music, meditation, reflection, and spiritual readings by members. And as we do every month, we will also have a birthday celebration for everyone born in the month of May. So please, especially if you're born in the month of May, please make it a point to come. And if any one of your family Sangha is also born in the month of May, you can bring them or among your friends. So we will do that next Sunday. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Gita. Presently, we are studying chapter 14. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.